All right. So moving on to the next question. Question 10. The right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation, and Resettlement Act 2013 makes provisions for the following: prior consent, payment of compensation, return of unutilized land, or all of the above. So, is it only one and two, one and three, or all of the above? Well, all of the above is the most redundant to this question. Sorry, but yeah. Any responses? Let's move to the list. So this is the list of key features of the act, right? You can see how all of these three are actually part of this list, right? Prior consent here, payment of compensations here, and return of unutilized land. So the answer is all of the above. Any queries regarding this? It's a straightforward answer from the list, right? All right. Moving on to the next question. In order to address historical injustice, the right to fair compensation and transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013 also applies retrospectively to the cases where no land acquisition award has been made. Is it true or false? Any responses? We'll take a short look at this act after this question. But any responses for this one? Does the act apply retrospectively to the cases where no land acquisition award has been made? Okay. We have one answer. Any other responses? Yeah, you are right. So it does apply retrospectively, right? So the answer is true. Usually, most acts are not retrospectively applicable. They are only applicable. Uh, unless and until it is specified that it is a retrospectively applicable act, we don't really do this, right? So let's take a look at what the act was and then what the act is right now. So the Land Acquisition Act 1894 was the act before the current LARR 2013, right? So there are five major domains. This is a snippet from that was taken from the Hindu. There are five major domains where uh, there have been improvements. So previously in the 1894 Act, there was no requirement for consent. Now we need consent from 70% of the affected families, right? For PPP projects, that is public-private partnership projects, and 80% for private projects. Previously, there was no clause requiring a social impact assessment, but right now it's mandatory, except in cases of urgency and irrigation projects where environmental impact assessment is required, right? Uh, so then regarding compensation, previously it was based on market value. So in right now, it's up to double of the market value in urban areas and four times in rural areas actually. So, right, so solatium previously was 30%, right now is 100% of compensation. Rehabilitation and resettlement, previously there was no provision and now it's been made mandatory. So there was a 2015 ordinance that was passed. Ordinance is basically usually when an act is passed, you need to run it by the parliamentary process, right? But the parliament sits only majorly twice per year, apart from the budget session, right? So because of this, whenever the parliament is not in session, if we need to make modifications in any law, we resort to what is known as an ordinance. An ordinance is an executive tool, meaning the legislature is not really involved. I would recommend that in case you're not familiar with what a legislative, executive, and a judiciary is, I would recommend a bit of brush up so that you can understand all these provisions better. Right. So an ordinance is primarily with the executive, so it's a presidential order. Right. So when it came to LARR, uh, the social impact assessment was made mandatory for every project except an emergency. However, the ordinance sort of diluted it, saying five categories of projects are exempted from this requirement. So, what are these five exempted projects? Defense, it's given here, right? So, defense, rural infrastructure, affordable housing, industrial corridors set up by the government or government undertakings, up to 1 kilometer on either side of the road or railway of the corridor, and infrastructure including public-private partnership projects where the government owns the land, right? So all of these have been exempted from the mandate of a social impact assessment. Consent also has been exempted for these projects. Compensation and resettlement is still the same, right? 4 times market value in rural areas and twice in urban areas. So this one is mildly faulty. So I'll take this. Compensation and resettlement and rehabilitation provisions for 13 of 13 other laws which govern land acquisition, right? So these are regarding other connected laws, right? So they will sort of be brought into consonance, as in they'll be aligned with LARR within a period of 1 year from 2013 was the original provision, right? So there was a special provision to safeguard food security. So this is particularly mentioned because a lot of agricultural land might actually be taken up, right, in land acquisition. So LARR 2013 sort of mentioned that state cannot acquire irrigated multi-crop land beyond a limit. So this limit is actually connected with the multi-crop agricultural land percentage in a state, right? So there was also an urgency clause that government can take any land needed for public purpose in case of urgency in like 1894. Right now, it's only for national security, national calamities, or any other emergency with parliament's approval being the key, right? So this is still in place. The thing is, uh, despite LARR, to this land acquisition is actually part of the concurrent list. I don't know if you remember. So Schedule 7 of the Constitution, I probably should have included a slide on it. Schedule 7 of the Constitution has three lists and several items listed under them, right? So the first list is the union list, where the union sort of reigns supreme in making laws for that. Second list is the state list, and land comes under the state list. However, land acquisition, resettlement, rehabilitation, all of this comes under the concurrent list. So when an item is there in the concurrent list, what happens is the central government makes a law, yes, but the state governments can make modifications to this law provided they get presidential assent. So they sort of send it to the center, and if the center is okay with the modification, they are good to go. They don't have to worry about it. So this sort of happens through the governor. Right? So a lot of states do modify. They've diluted the laws. So the figures here are just for three states that are being spoken about here. That is particularly they've been using older laws, right? However, the other states also have diluted the new LARR, which means effectively there's not much fair or just compensation that's actually happening. So, what is the issue? We do have a judicial provision where just compensation needs to be given, right? The issue is usually people who are affected by such developments are not able to afford this litigation. They do not have the money to approach the courts, right? Because of which they're sort of trapped in poverty and trapped in this situation where they can't really do anything about the land being taken away from them. So that's the issue with this entire scenario. So, for example, here, the three states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Maharashtra, Apparently, so this is a slightly older article, right? It's from 2019. They've been using older laws. So according to ILARR, they're supposed to be getting 70% consent for PPP projects. However, they've not been getting any consent from anybody for these projects, right? Because they've been using a different law. Any queries? So land comes under the state list, yes, but acquisition comes under concurrent list, which is why both the union government and the states are capable of, you know, legislatively determining how they're going to acquire land. Okay. If there are no queries, then moving on to the next question. IFC performance standards of particular relevance to socioeconomic impact assessment include A. Performance Standard 1 Assessment and Management of Environmental and Social Risks and Impacts. PS2 Labor and Working Conditions. PS7 Indigenous Peoples. Or D. All of the above. Any responses? Okay, we have one response. Any others? So you are right. The answer is all of the above. So from the slides, three of these performance standards were highlighted. The first one was risk management, second one was labor, and the third one was indigenous people. Right, all three were actually highlighted. The answer is all of the above. Any queries? All right, moving on to the next question. Match the terms given in Group A with their description in Group B. The first one is social license to operate. It's P. Q is free, prior, and informed consent. And R is social risk. Any answers? You can also give me individual terms and their corresponding answers. Any responses? Okay, so okay, we have one response. All right, let's see what the answers are, right? So these terms, key terms are usually present. They've not been defined by IAIA, but these terms have been focused upon because this particular report actually highlights them as fundamental concepts that, or key concepts that need to be understood before we look at social impact assessment, right? So social license to operate is the level of acceptance or approval of the activities of an organization by its stakeholders, especially local impacted communities. Right? So that's P3. Right. So free, prior, and informed consent is a procedural mechanism developed to assist in ensuring the right of indigenous people to self-determination. Right? So Q will be 1. And social risk, uh, there are actually several definitions to social risk, especially from the corporate side. We have a different definition, and from impact assessment side, we have a different definition, which is why we focus on this particular definition from World Bank, which is the possibility that the intervention would create, reinforce, or deepen inequity and or social conflict, or that the attitudes and the actions of key stakeholders may subvert the achievement of the development objective, or that the development objective or means to achieve it lack ownership among key stakeholders. So this is the definition of social risk, right? That this might be a possibility. So it's R2. So the answer is C. Any queries regarding this? We'll sort of take a look at SLO and FPIC a bit more in detail. But as of now, any queries? Okay, let's look at SLO. SLO, or social license to operate, is a term which is used to denote the level of acceptance or approval of the activities of an organization by its stakeholders, right? Especially local impacted communities. So this social license for an organization or a development to sort of gain it, we have several levels, right? So let's look at the image on the right first. So initially there is like the project doesn't have any social acceptance. Like they don't have the license to operate as in they cannot operate an organization just like that, right? You need to sort of gain some form of legitimacy, right? So once you gain a certain level of legitimacy, what happens is the stakeholders, the different stakeholders, including the community where all of this is happening, they start accepting the organization, right? And then you come to a certain level of credibility, right? And then the society just does not just accept; they also approve what you're doing or how the organization functions. And then there is a trust boundary beyond which psychological identification or trust happens. So whatever you do goes. It's not something that people will say that day one of an organization arriving in a certain area, right? So this is a multi-step process, and uh, oftentimes you do one thing wrong. So credibility basically depends on you claiming things and them being true, right? You claim something to be true and then you fall short of the claim, your credibility goes down. So people might still accept what you're doing, you might not fall so far down, but what might happen is if you breach this boundary of legitimacy, then yes, you are in trouble. If it's a tall claim and then you fall short, but oftentimes you can always climb back up, right? So this is mostly organizational economics. So SLO sort of operates in these scenarios, right? So when it comes to FPIC, which is free, prior, and informed consent, so each word is essentially, so this is very important, mostly in case of indigenous people, because these are people where the agency is your ability to sort of convey what you think, right? So their agency is very limited in terms of how limited their exposure is. They might not be able to communicate something, they might be intimidated, or they might just not find the need to communicate, right? So, whenever an intervention or a development is happening in such areas, uh, we need to obtain free, prior, and informed consent. So, free as in the consent is free. We are not forcing someone to give consent, right? It's prior, as in before you start the project or start making some substantial change to their environment, you need to take consent. And informed. People shouldn't be like, you can't just go tell them terms that they don't understand. They need to understand what the consequences or what is actually happening, how are their lives going to be affected, and then they need to give consent. Right? And consent as in not from one person, but it's a collective decision made by the right holders, right? So that's a short graphic on what FPIC is, right? Any queries? All right, let's move on to the next question. State true or false. Non-technical risks relate to the managerial, legal, social, and political issues faced by a project. Is it true or false? Excuse me. Any answers? Okay, we have one answer. Any others? You are right, sir. So let's take a. Okay, both of you are right. So non-technical risks are actually the managerial, legal, social, and political issues faced by a project in contrast to technical risks, which might be, say you have a project and you don't even have the fundamental resources to carry through that project, right? That would be a technical risk. Say water availability is a problem or water quality is a problem. You want a certain type of, certain composition in the water, or you don't want a certain mineral to be present in the water and that mineral is present in abundance and you don't have the money to remove the mineral. That would be a technical risk, right? So you go ahead with the project, you're going to face running short of money or some other form of, issue. However, when there is a managerial, legal, social, or political issue, say there is a strike towards what you're doing, or your organization sort of mal anticipated the kind of response that you'll be getting from the society. Say your social impact assessment sort of indicates that this project is going to do more harm than good. All of these are a problem, right? So the answer is in fact true. Any queries? All right, moving on to the next question. Match the EIA typologies as given by World Bank Guide 1997 for road projects of Group A with their description in which, sorry, there is a repetition, with their description in Group B. So we have four terms. P is project specific EIA, Q is programmatic EIA, R is sectoral EIA, and S is regional EIA. Any responses? You can also give me individual options. Okay, we have one response. Okay, let's look at the answer. So this is the list of the five types of EIA applied to road projects, right? So project specific EIA is assessing individual. Let's actually look at this and answer. Right. So examining a number of individual projects that may be delivered together as a package or a program. So it's actually a set of individual projects and they are delivered as a package. So that's programmatic EIA. So assessing individual new roads. Whenever individual projects are assessed in their own right, that is project specific EIA. Okay. So examining all the planned projects within a specified geographical area at the subnational level. So whenever this comes up, uh, that will be regional EIA. So it's for a region, right? And the next one is strategically assessing all projects of a certain type. So from a certain sector, that is, such as transport infrastructure in a relatively large geographical area. So this certain type being the keyword. So answer is P2, Q1, R4, and S3. So these are the slides pertaining to all these particular ones. So the answer is A. Any queries regarding this? So there is one more, if you look at the slide, right? Summary environmental evaluation is when it's sort of like a quick, rapid EIA, focusing on specific categories of impact and their mitigation. So we won't be, the scoping will sort of be very narrow and predetermined. If you remember, scoping is the second step in an EIA where you determine which are the angles in which you're going to do the environmental impact assessment. So subsequent slides sort of give you details of each particular type of EIA. So the answer is A. Any queries? Okay. Moving on to the next question. State true or false. Indian government provides environmental impact assessment guidance manual for highways. Is it true or false? Any answers? Okay, we have a couple of answers, and both of you are right. The Indian government does give us guidelines for EIA of highway projects, right? So this one is from 1989, and we have an updated version, EIA guidance manual for highways in February 2010. So this is a slide showing the contents as to give an idea of what all they cover in such a guidance manual. Uh, of particular note is that they give a checklist for erosion control. Like this is a sample of what all has been given. In hilly areas, they give a checklist for erosion control. And they also give general standards for discharge of effluent. So we might think it's since it's a highway, it will be very specific to roads alone, not necessarily. There are other related aspects for which guidelines are also provided. So you can see how an EIA sort of spills over into other domains always. Then Indian Road Congress is sort of the organization which gives us codes of practices for not just highway projects, for most roads. Several codes are actually available, and the IRC code list is given in this particular manual. So whenever you want to say talk about like construct roads in the hills or guidelines for pedestrian facilities, you'll have to look at the particular corresponding code, and the code will sort of specify what sort of guidelines or what sort of measures need to be taken. We also have a set of international good practices that are sort of recommended by this particular EAA guidance manual. Any queries? One second. Sorry, there seems to be an internet. Pardon the interruption. So moving on to the, so that's the answer. Moving on to the next question. In UK's web tag guidance, the full form of TAG is Transport Advisory Group, Transport Analysis Guidance, Technical Analysis Guidance, or Technology Advisory Group. Any responses? So we have one answer. Okay, let's see what it is. TAG is actually transport analysis guidance. So they actually give it's a guidance manual both for transport, but they also have uh, specifications for landscape and visuals. So when it comes to uh, transport, landscape, and visuals, primarily because while traveling, there are certain landscapes that are, sort of come into view. These two are, oftentimes tied together. But in this case, the answer is actually transport analysis guidance. So the answer is B. Any queries? All right. Before we go into the few assignment questions from the current week run, any general queries regarding the session, regarding the course? Anything? Any suggestions? All right. We'll open the query session up again towards the end of the session. Right. Moving on to the current assignment questions for week 5. Which among these? Okay. So which among these has not entrenched HIA as part of the ESIA process? All right, we have one answer. And you are right, sir. The answer is India. So, ma'am actually talks about it. There's no particular slide regarding this. Uh, talks about the list of countries that have HIA as part of ESIA process. India has not really. It is taking a few initiatives according to a few publications online, but as of now, it has not entrenched. Right. So, moving on to the next question. Match the terms given in Group A with their transition project outcomes in Group B. We're looking at increased morbidity, loss of access, social disarticulation. These are all, if you remember, issues happening with, uh, you know, uh, resettlement or rehabilitation as such. Any responses? So one key way of looking at it is morbidity and mortality are usually healthcare terms, right? So P has to be true. So if you look at it, uh, increased morbidity, the approach is to give improved healthcare, right? And for loss of access, it's restoration of community assets and services. And for social disarticulation, obviously networks and community rebuilding. So social disarticulation is when you sort of lose community ties. Right? So the answer is D. Any queries? All right, that's straightforward. So question 3. This is again from something that we already saw before. According to cultural keystone species, Garibaldi and Turner, uh, sort of define it as culturally salient species that shape in a major way the cultural identity of a people. Their importance is reflected in the fundamental roles these species play in diet, materials, medicines, and or spiritual practices. Is it true or false? We saw this earlier towards the first half of the session, right? And both of you are correct. The answer is in fact true. So that's the slide that deals with this. Moving on to the next question. This is again something that we already saw. Which among the given below defines eminent domain? Right of government or its agent to expropriate private property for private use with payment of compensation. Right of a government or its agency to expropriate private property for public use without payment of compensation. Right of a government or its agent to expropriate private property for public use with payment of compensation. And the fourth option is for private use without payment of compensation. So these are the two variables in these. What kind of use and whether there is compensation being paid. Right? Yes, the answer is C. So when you put it for public use, you take away private property. Expropriate is take away. Right? Private property for public use along with payment of compensation. Right? Moving on to the next question. Match the terms given in Group A with their description in Group B. So three of these we actually saw already. Right? We have resettlement, economic displacement, compensation, and post-population. Let me just go ahead and give compensation. We already saw compensation is when we pay in cash or kind. Right? Post-population is the people who are living around areas where resettlement is being done. Economic displacement is when people lose their uh, income streams, right, or their livelihood. So that's Q is one. And resettlement is it is a planned process of relocating people and communities from one place to another. So the answer is D. Any queries? Yes, you are right, Mr. Ramit. Okay, moving on to the next question. What are the key objectives of IFC Performance Standard 2? So, if you remember, it is actually related to labor, right? So, compliance with relevant employment and labor laws, safe and healthy working conditions, fair treatment and non-discrimination, and worker protection, especially vulnerable groups such as children. So, is it just one and two, one and three, or all of the above? Oh, yes, the answer is all of the above. So the full set of objectives for standard 2 is actually given in the slide from the lecture, right? So the answer is all of the above. Okay. Moving on to the next question, which has been brought up in the discussion forum as well. So let's take a look at what the answer is. Match the IFC performance standards given in Group A with their description in Group B. So we have PS2, PS3, PS6, and PS7. And the themes are indigenous people, resource efficiency, labor, and biodiversity conservation and natural resources. Just give me the closest answer possible. Any responses? Or you can also give me individual specifications. Okay, let's see. So if you remember, we're talking about 2, 3, 6, and 7. 2 is labor, 3 is resource efficiency, 6 is biodiversity, and 7 is indigenous people. Right? So these are the slides that are sort of talking about these. So the answer is 2 is labor, 3 is resource efficiency, 6 is biodiversity, and 7 is indigenous people. So this list is something that you will have to remember, right? So the answer is actually D, and it's given as D as well. 1 second. Yeah, it's given as D as well. However, this is wrong. It's S is 1. So the options are slightly wrong, but even in the discussion forum, several people have pointed out that uh, there is an issue. Any queries regarding this? This is the answer, right? All right. Moving on to the next question. Sorry, sorry, my internet is out in my phone. So yeah, I hope you like answered the closest possible. Even otherwise, you should be compensated for this issue. Let's see. I don't know. It is up to the main NPTEL team for the course. So moving on to the next question. This is again another question where there was an issue, right? So match the IFC performance standards given in Group A with their description in Group B. So we have three options in Group A. First of all, it's regional, right? Regional EIA, sectoral EIA, and Botswana's guidance. The thing is, both 2 and 3 are the same, unfortunately. So I don't know what the team is doing again. It should be corrected shortly. Nonetheless, let's see what the answer is, right? So to achieve a comprehensive technical basis for decision making through integrating EIA into the planning process, that's Botswana's guidance. If you remember from the slide, right? And the rest, again, if we saw it earlier in the session today. So sectoral EIA is when you have one type of projects which is distributed in a larger, area, geographical area, which the answer is not given here. Here, regional EIA is given. So it's regional EIA is given. So to assess the cumulative and other potential effects that all projects present in future propose for a given geographical area or administrative region. So it's for a bound region might have on the environment. So usually cumulative assessment also comes under regional EIA. Usually, right? So P turns out to be both 2 and 3, unfortunately, and R is 1. So R is 1 gives us A and D, but these two are problematic. So yeah, I think this will also, the main team, I'm pretty sure, has taken this into cognizance, and the answer keys will be modified accordingly. The marks will also be modified accordingly. I hope that solves the two queries that keep coming up in the discussion forum. So that's all for today's session. Any other general queries? Any modifications that you want in the format of the classes? Anything? Otherwise, we'll close the session. I hope the sessions are useful. I hope this format is better for you. If you would like a revision of the content of the lectures itself, the Saturday sessions are better for you. You can also take a look at both the sessions in YouTube. We'll be uploading videos weekly, right? So I just give a bit of background information so that it's easier to retain when you have that bit of background. Since loose statements never stay in our minds. I mean, even for me, the course is new, so I also try to sort of look around, give a bit of background. Thank you for your responses. I hope the sessions are useful. Please give your feedback also in the feedback forms that are being circulated. You can also put forward any request for a particular topic to be explained or for a particular question to be explained in the live session. You can always bring it up in the discussion forum. Otherwise, I think we'll call it a day for today. So have a good day or good evening. Are there any online exam centers for the exam? I'm not really sure, sir. I will put a message across in the, to the core team. I'm in touch with them, so I'll let them know that this was asked. Okay, okay. I will bring it to their notice that there are people outside India and they would require online exam centers. It will be I hopefully posted in the discussion forum, or I will sort of get back to you in the next session. Okay. If there are no other queries, I think we'll close the session. All right, then. Have a good evening. Thank you.